and welcome back to Nerds of Legend. I'm Ben. Next to me is Brendan. Unfortunately, Joel, due to some baby duty stuff, is knocked the hell out and will not be joining us today. So we're just gonna get right into it with the two of us, where we're gonna keep talking about King Tut's curse. And one little announcement, just a reminder that we will be having our this Friday from 6 to 10 p.m. Central Time, we will be having a special collaboration stream with the Darling Creep Show. So we're very excited, and so is she. So just reminded him about that. And then the other one is our book next week is of course, even though I've been listening, I can't remember the name as is my want. So hold on a second, and I will pull that right up. And it is Mind Games by Carolyn Crane. So again, thanks everybody, and for those little announcements, and we'll get right into it. Brendan, I believe earlier you were talking on the call that there's been mummy news since our last stream. So I don't know if that's where you want to get things started or not, but it seems like a good place to start as any.
For a posthumous dynastic empire, there has been a heck of a lot of mummy news in the past few weeks. Even going as recently as the last episode on Egyptomania and the mummy craze. There's quite a bit of news in the Egyptology community.
Oh, really?
An embalming workshop was discovered in Saqqara, an ancient burial ground in Egypt. The site was discovered in 2016 because of the backlog and the nature of archaeology and having to move things that are found and having to document them and clean them. And it hasn't been till very recently that molecular analysis of the residues in the pots at this embalming site were able to be researched. And so the scientific journal Nature, they published it on the Wednesday before February 1st. Or it may have been the 1st. This article is from February 1st, so 5 days ago. They discovered that this embalming workshop is from the 7th and 6th century BC. They studied the organic residues in the pots to try to figure out just what the mummies were embalmed in. And they used juniper, cypress, and cedar oils from the wood. They used pistachio tree resin, animal fat, beeswax, so a lot of organic compounds to preserve the bodies.
Yeah.
Really
pistachio resin, the flavor.
Seal in the flavor. Pistachio resin and castor oil were only used for the head, apparently. So maybe they thought they were the good stuff, the good, or maybe they were, sacred or something. But
it's just interesting how it's like that this whole workshop was just like left in state, like didn't get like it was just buried in the sands or something, or just like abandoned, but like they left all their stuff behind. Do they have any sort of idea of like why?
You know what? It's in Nature. It was published, so I can try to see if we can see how the embalming workshop was preserved so well. I think the reason why is because the ceramic vessels were sealed. Mm-hmm. So they were able to get the organic substances on the inside of the vessels. I don't know how well the embalming workshop was left. I don't know if it was buried, if it was sealed. But those vessels that they did molecular let's see what they call it. The molecular analysis of the organic compounds seem to have survived well enough. They used micro-level analysis, highlighting the socioeconomic status of a tomb owner, to macro-level interpretations of society. So I presume that they were really, really good mummification houses, and they were maybe middle-class mummification houses, right?
So there's like the primo ones, and then there's the ones that are like, eh.
Yeah, apparently there was high demand for certain embalming products. So there was exclusive demand for pistachio tree and conifer byproduct oils from the Mediterranean. damar and elemi. I don't know how to pronounce that, but those are tropical forest organic compounds. And Antiu and Sephet are what they called myrrh and incense.
Mm.
Sacred oils were coniferous oils or tar-based mixtures. So apparently it's like, hey, my dad was rich. I want to embalm him with the good stuff. And so there'd be,
And was there like a point where like mummification was like not practiced anymore in Egypt, or is there like a hard line on that, or like
that's a very good question. I wouldn't be surprised if someone who did more research knew that. I know for a fact that they were able to discern the socioeconomic status of those mummified based on what they were surrounded with, and their not only in the sarcophagi and in the burial wrappings, but they also would place items inside the corpus.
yeah,
So that actually
like scarab jewelry and stuff like
exactly,
that.
yeah. So I presume that the fewer objects that were entombed with the mummy would help, belie information about its status.
If they're using pistachio oil and stuff, as opposed to just like
beeswax in the hair, right?
Yeah, or instead of just like, just dunk them in formaldehyde, it'll be fine.
Yeah, just dunk them by the ankles, right, and wrap them in toilet paper. No, but yeah, this is a fascinating article.
No, don't use those bandages. That's for paying customers. This is just linens. You don't use the fine linens.
Now, I don't know the legal ramifications of showing photos from a different publication, but good grief is this article long. Okay. And they actually have, Ben with the real questions, they have a 3D isometric cross-section of Saqqara Complex embalming facility.
What?
Yeah.
Throw it up. Toss it up, Jamie.
I mean, might
care.
as well.
We'll be fine.
Why not? Okay, let's.
We're gonna get them clicks, maybe. Who knows?
Oh, and there go. Oh, and Killian, my dog, is so excited about the mummies. Okay.
So excited about the mummies.
You see here, this is the surface entrance. Is it working?
Yeah.
All right, good. Yeah, this is the surface entrance. It seems like there's a 30-meter shaft descending to the burial chambers where they found these jars, ceramic jars stored.
So it's not like they found like a workshop. They found like the structure of the old workshop, and then they found all the goodies down inside.
It basically looks like the workshop got leveled, and then they found the safe, right?
Yeah, they found they found where they kept all the mummies.
All the good.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is what they call the red goldfish bowl. That it had inscriptions on it, belying what was inside. And you can see the hieroglyphics very faintly on the storage containers. There was the white clay beaker. This was used to be put on the head, probably to ensconce it in whatever material or resin they were using. That's crazy that this is so recently discovered.
That's wild that they like. That I didn't realize that was like how they did it for like the pores, was just like, oh, just throw them down the shaft and.
Look at this! They have gas chromatograms too. Ooh. They know the organic compounds. Oh my gosh, this is extensive. This borders on.
This is another episode. No,
I was gonna say this borders on the no longer entertaining for those of us who want to do hard organic chemistry and tie that into archaeology. This is we're approaching this with a casual, post 9 to 5 job approach. This is a little. PhD.
This is too much.
I mean, not for me, but
no.
We have an audience to think of. Yeah, so there's even more mummy news, if you believe it. We'll move on.
Yeah, now we'll get into the nitty gritty, because I believe where we left off last time was the uncovering and opening of King Tut's tomb.
Yes, yeah. So they took their time slowly removing the antiquities that were found in Tut's tomb, and it appears as though the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, with the Egyptomania, understood that they needed to preserve or maintain as much as they could.
Yeah.
With Western interests in purchasing them, with locals understandably trying to make a living and put food on the table. The Egyptian Museum in Cairo actually preserved a fair amount of these mummies without opening them.
Mm-hmm.
January 25th, 2023, they actually took a 23-year-old teenage mummy. They refer to him as the Golden Boy because of what's in the sarcophagus. And in 1916, so this is, I believe, 7 years before Tutankhamun was discovered. 6 years before Tutankhamun was discovered, this mummy was found. And what they're doing now with these preserved mummies is, rather than open them like archaeologists of antiquity, what they're doing instead is penetrating the sarcophagus with X-rays to see what's inside without having to open it.
Yeah, because I believe we talked last time, a lot of times what had happened is you open up the mummy carcass and it just like disintegrates, right? Because it's been like...
Yeah, it's...
They'd have like mummy opening parties or whatever, and then it just
right.
instantly degrades.
There's no moisture inside. The air pressure is even different. It hasn't been exposed to certain bacterias, maybe.
Yeah.
Mold, that sort of thing.
Did you say that was January 23rd?
Of 2023. So this is...
That was the day we did our mummy episode.
Yep. February 1st, January 20th. It's ridiculous.
No.
The curse is passing, perhaps. I'll have you know that.
What have we done?
Yesterday was squat day. I'm trying to stay fit. Mm-hmm. If I fall over from a deleterious disease or sickness, it's not of my own choosing. So I'll let you know if scarabs start rending my flesh in the night or anything. You'll be the first to know.
Excellent.
But yeah, what they do is they place the entirety of the sarcophagus in a CT scanner, and the X-rays create sequential cross sections, and they take all of the cross sections and they build up a three-dimensional picture. And this ties into what I was saying earlier. They found that there were 3 columns between the folds of the wrappings inside the mummy's body cavity. There was the Eye of Horus, a scarab, an Ankhet amulet of the horizon, the Knot of Isis. Many of these amulets are made of gold, semi-precious stones, fired clay, or faience, a ceramic material with a siliceous body and a brightly colored glaze. So with CT scans, they're able to find the valuables inside these sarcophagi, and they could tell the socioeconomic status of the mummies without having to open them, which is very fascinating. It was gilded on the outside, which is why they refer to it as the Golden Boy. So they figured this teenager was quite wealthy. But I mean, they're able to even penetrate the skeletal layer, so they can see if the boy himself had spinal issues or if he was getting well fed. All this stuff, and they don't even have to open these tombs anymore. It's fascinating.
Well, it's interesting because, like, I was just thinking about this. I'm talking straight off the dome here, so it might be bullshit, but gold has some antimicrobial properties, I believe. So I wonder if just them using like gold sarcophagi also aids in like the preservation.
Perhaps. I know copper does.
Copper, silver, gold.
Yeah, they line medical beds.
Yeah.
And so on. So perhaps. But yeah, there was an Isis knot that was included, and the goal of this amulet was to enlist the power of Isis to protect the body. Falcon and ostrich plumes symbolize the duality of the material, ephemeral life, and the spiritual and perpetual life. Inside the thoracic cavity of the teenager, the part of the torso that contains the heart, the lungs, and the esophagus, embalmers had placed a golden scarab beetle. And they even have CT scans of the skeletal structure. It's quite fascinating. So even in 1916, predating when Carter finally found Tutankhamun's tomb, the Egyptian Museum in Cairo was like, hey, we need to preserve what we can of our culture.
Because everything's getting taken away by them.
Everything's getting,
those islanders.
The public craze was beginning to be called Tutmania, a specific instance of the long-standing phenomenon of Western Egyptomania. So the papers were blowing up with this.
Mm-hmm.
Breasted's son Charles said that the news of the discovery broke upon a world sated with post-First World War conferences, but nothing proved and nothing achieved. After a summer journalistically so dull that an Egyptian farmer's report of a gooseberry the size of a crabapple achieved the main news pages of the London metropolitan dailies. So people were so glad that the war was over that anything else was vastly interesting.
Hmm.
It reminds me of a musical I watched called Meet Me in St. Louis.
Yeah.
That I found to be rather trite and droll and wasn't very interesting. I'm not a big musical guy, and I watched it in film class, and I was like, why do they care about the turn of the century 1890s St. Louis and straw hats and dancing and whatnot? The movie was made in the middle of World War II. The American public wanted nothing to do with the current state of mind of what was going on in Europe and the Pacific. They wanted to think about simpler times, pleasant times, and they wanted soma. They wanted a medication, a pill for them to forget for maybe 2 hours what was going on around them.
They wanted to be able to think, yes, I remember when the biggest news story was who Farmer Jeb's wife, daughter was making eyes at the county dance,
Yeah, and in post-war Europe, it seems as though Egypt and Egyptomania and ancient history fill the void of a lot of individuals going, we need to rebuild our civilizations. We have a whole generation of boys that are gone. Looking to the past is a far more entertaining proposition, and so it appears that in
what's going on right now.
Yeah, in the minds of some, this was far more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The resulting media frenzy was unprecedented in the history of Egyptology. We mentioned last episode that Carter became a celebrity almost overnight. Internationally famous, Lord Carnarvon, who funded it, also so. If you think about a director and a producer, everyone sort of makes money off of a good movie, right? Yeah. So off of this production, many were taking the credit. Tutankhamun, formerly unknown to the public, became so familiar that he had the title we all know, King Tut. Was first coined in the papers. It got to the point where by February of 1923, there were tourist crowds outside of the tomb entrance. They abandoned the normal sightseeing itinerary and flocked to the tomb. There was a retaining wall around the pit where the tomb entrance lay, which was actually, I believe, already there.
Yeah, didn't they have to have a 24-hour guard to basically keep people from trying to get in and gank shit or poke around? Yeah. And
so it was actually standard procedure in that time for there to be armed guards. Mm-hmm. Egyptian guards would usually accompany an official from I believe it was either the Cairo Museum or the provincial government. I believe it was still, we mentioned this last episode, it was still under the jurisdiction of the United Kingdom at the time. But I believe they were usually, when you went on expeditions, tourists or whatnot, they had security to maintain the sanctity of the grounds. Now, this wasn't always perfect, and there are tales of grave robbers in the thick of night. I hate to reference the 98, 99 Brendan Fraser mummy movie too many times, but
it's kind of topical. It's fine.
It is kind of topical. Brendan Fraser's topical even. So they were no strangers to. I mean, grave robbing was prolific in the time of the pharaohs, much less post World War I Middle East period. So it was a very common occurrence. So they had guards, but this was like nothing they had seen before. This was a full on frenzy. There were people going down to Egypt to see the pyramids before, but now people are going just to see King Tut's tomb.
Yeah.
So they had throngs of individuals around the retaining wall. People demanded to enter. Many were like, hey, do you know who I am? People of position, power, influence, or wealth were trying to buy their way in.
It's like, how dare you tell me I can't go there? Don't you know who I am?
Yeah. And if you've ever been to Jewel Cave, or if you've ever been to archaeological or natural finds, you will know that the more people that visit, the more likely you will damage or permanently change the environment. So they had real fear that the more people that visited this, the more harm was going to come to the find. As you can see, the presence of even one person can thoroughly destroy a historical display. You're live. All right. I'm sure she just loves Egypt as well.
Yeah.
Carter and Mace estimated a quarter of the work time during the first season was given over to accommodating visitors. So this was, I mean, this is we estimated the distance between the United Kingdom and Egypt previously was like a very lengthy road trip across the continental United States. People were still making that trip.
Yeah.
Vogue magazine, June 1923, had an advertisement for Ramses brand perfume, touting scent bases known and used since the days of Tutankhamun.
So they're like, everybody was cashing in on that.
Everybody had a plug.
Everyone wanted to smell like Cleopatra and all this, you know.
So if something's in vogue, a perfume in vogue, you're seeing already that there is an association of opulence, ostentatiousness, luxury with ancient Egypt. And the idea of King Tutankhamun was no exception. Pure opulence. And this is a big reason why he caught the public's attention. There were replicas as early as 1924. The British Empire exhibition featured a reproduction of the tomb. Obviously, they couldn't have everything because not everything in the tomb had been fully excavated yet, but there was such a demand that even within 2 years, there was already a replica exhibition. The public in Europe, Western Europe, the United States even, compared everyday items in the tomb to modern household goods. You're thinking clothing, jewelry, furniture, decor, ashtrays, everything, right? With Egyptian-inspired designs. My grandmother grew up, let's see, she was a child in the 20s. She was a nurse around the World War II period, around the 30s. They had kids by the 50s. And she had Egyptian-themed earrings. These were, I think they were gold inlaid, but they were like treated wood. Yeah. And she had like a napkin holder that was sort of like Osiris, like the wing of Osiris with the sun and everything. This was a visual aesthetic that permeated with this mania. You can think of, the first thing that comes to my mind is something very near and dear to me, the Tivoli Theater in Downers Grove. There are many instances of that art.
Like the Egyptian in DeKalb, or
the Egyptian Theater in DeKalb. Yeah. There's Grauman's Chinese Theater in LA. The idea of the East in general was exotic and new and fascinating. You see that in Western designs of the period. We talked about this last episode. You see that in art of the period. In musicals, Madame Butterfly, right? Gilbert and Sullivan shows. The East was like we're in overcast, rainy England, but over in the East, things are fascinating. And it was only up to a fever pitch with Tutankhamun. Products of Tut Mania were mass-produced and marketed to the public. Egyptians in the 19th century had little interest in ancient civilization, so it's 1800s. Yeah. The fervor hadn't risen to a peak yet at the turn of the century. In the early 20th century, the attitude changed in Egypt, largely because of Ahmed Kamal, one of the first Egyptian Egyptologists. So for a while there, while Westerners were going stir-crazy over buying these mummies, the locals are just kind of like, all right, go ham.
They're like, sure, you can have this dead guy from 2,000 years ago. I don't care.
But Ahmed Kamal sort of led the way for native-born Egyptologists. Yeah. In the years leading up to the First World War, Egyptian nationalists began to find a source of national identity through ancient Egypt. Now, obviously, the polytheism of ancient Egypt had been replaced by Islam and by Coptic Christianity in the minority. Um, but drawing back to an idea of an all powerful,
A time when things were really good, and
yeah,
a
yeah,
little bit of nationalism going on, and
dynastic Egypt
yeah.
that lasted millennia.
Hmm.
Especially when you're colonized or um, when a different continent is
Calling
sending
the shots.
calling the shots. You think back to a time when you were supreme. This ideology was known as Pharaonism and was well established by the 1919 Egyptian Revolution. So it seems as though, okay, so perhaps I don't know if that revolution was successful or not. Let's find out very quickly. Countrywide revolution against the British occupation. Okay, yeah, so Britain did recognize Egyptian independence by 1919.
Hmm.
So the
Well, that was when like the sort of empire was starting to crumble a little bit. That
yes,
was like
yeah.
we're
So
giving up India, we're giving up our colony. The various colonies were finally like, hey, you know, the British Empire basically like shattered its authority during world. They basically put all of their military might into fighting off Germany during World War One, and then they didn't have the manpower or strength
yeah.
or taste for holding on to all of their holdings all over the world.
Yeah, there was great material loss and loss of manpower,
Yeah.
millions of lives, but also in the Middle East,
Well, they had the agreement with the Ottoman Empire to like,
well,
hey, we'll let you do your own thing now if you help us out.
they
And
they threw large amounts of material to contest the Ottoman Empire.
Mhm.
We mentioned T.E. Lawrence last episode, promising Arab tribes that if they helped the United Kingdom to defeat the Ottomans,
Mhm.
that they would gain sovereignty and autonomy, and that didn't exactly happen. Locals were mad, and
They're like, hey, you said you'd go away if we helped you, and
yeah.
now you're still here. What's going on?
We mentioned previously that Carter actually had to take a hiatus during World War One for his archaeology.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be surprised if a fair amount of the publicity and the adventure associated with archaeologists in that time and at that period in the Middle East came from the fraught danger of being in an area that is essentially a
Contested war zone.
a contested war zone of conflict, but also in between that mummy that had a CT scan after being found in 1916, and Carter finding King Tut in the early 20s. There had been a revolution.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a very tumultuous period, climate, time, and area for these archaeologists, Egyptologists specifically, to continue their work. So it even more lends credence to the
Mm-hmm.
the rise of Egyptian nationalism when they're like, wait a second, since the times of Napoleon, we've had colonizers rummaging through our history.
So I feel like we've kind of set the scene in terms of Egyptomania and what was going on at the time. But what happened when they cracked that baby open?
Well, let's see. By mid-February, the antechamber was cleared. Carter and Carnarvon formally opened the burial chamber with government officials so that they could inspect the inside of the tomb. The end of the burial chamber had an open doorway to a fourth room. It contained a canopic chest that housed Tutankhamun's embalmed organs that had been separated from his body. He had it boarded up so it wouldn't be a distraction during the clearance of the burial chamber, and so it wouldn't be damaged. It was reopened in 27. So they spent years meticulously making sure that this tomb wasn't destroyed. There was, naturally, because of the fervor, there was a period where the press and the public could inspect the tomb after the antiquities had been removed. It was closed for the season on the 26th of February. They had large groups of workmen that would rebury the tomb entrance, guards to protect it. This is 26th February. Shortly after the tomb was closed, Lord Carnarvon, remember, funded Carter for this expedition.
Yeah, the bankroller, yeah.
Yes, accidentally cut open a mosquito bite on his cheek while he was shaving.
Mm-hmm.
This wound from a mosquito bite that was then cut by a shaving razor
that he received in Egypt.
By the time of the 5th of April, so within 2 months, the cut on his mosquito bite resulted in blood poisoning and pneumonia, and he died on the 5th of April. Within 3 months of closing down the tomb for the season, the man who funded the expedition was dead.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he had been in frail health previously, but the fact that he died from something so inane.
But good enough health that, like, at the time he was able to, like, instantly, like, drop everything and, like, travel all the way across the continent and across the Mediterranean Sea to Egypt, you know.
Yeah, you remember.
Like, he wasn't that frail,
not,
you know.
Not only did Lord Carnarvon go, I believe he brought his daughter. So it was a familial thing. And yeah, he was healthy enough to travel to Egypt, and now he was dead.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the idea of Egyptian spirits, reanimated mummies, curses of the pharaohs predated Carnarvon's untimely end. These had already appeared by the late 19th century. The Curse of the Pharaohs was a very, it was a real concept in the public eye. This already existed.
Well, and it probably started with the whole media frenzy because there was like a sort of like pharaonic warning on the entrance to Tut's tomb, right? I think we covered that.
There was, yeah.
And all the workers were like,
yeah, it was.
I'm just gonna go stand over here. You can go ahead and open that.
It was common practice for the pharaohs to.
Wasn't there some whole thing that like when they cracked it open, there was like a huge like, which is like we find this is normal for like, you know, caves that are like left sealed for a long time. There's like, you know, there's like an outrush of like poisonous like bad air that was like rushed out when they opened the tomb and stuff like that, or was that just like journalistic stuff that was added later?
I would have to do more research into there being a noxious fart cloud upon opening the tomb, but I know for a fact that we've seen it on film.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised. They had touched nothing but the lamp. Yeah, they had rather meticulous documentation of this excavation. I wouldn't be surprised if that was covered, if it did indeed happen. Personally, I don't know. But yeah, Marie Corelli, the author, there was a psychic known as Cairo, claimed to have warned Carnarvon of mortal peril before he passed. There was an Egyptologist named Arthur Weigall, who was the Daily Mail correspondent on Tut's tomb, and he had said that he had observed Carnarvon joking he's entered the tomb. If he goes down in that spirit, I give him 6 weeks to live. Later accounts, such as Henry Field, the anthropologist, recalling that an ancient text which wished death upon violators of the tomb and that it was over the doorway. No written curse has ever been documented in Tut's tomb. Although some Egyptian tombs did contain such curses, most are from non-royal tombs that predate King Tut. So it appears as though King Tut's tomb only had inscriptions of the fact that the pharaoh was encased inside. Apparently, there were no written curses documented in his tomb. Perhaps they were destroyed due to time. Perhaps they weren't. They wore away. But as far as the excavation was concerned, they did not find any. Mm-hmm. It already was in the public eye. They'd already been observed beforehand, and it seems like that was enough for speculation. Any deaths or unusual events connected with the tomb were also treated as possible results of the curse. Carnarvon's son and heir, Henry Herbert, 6th Earl of Carnarvon, said that Cairo suffered a power outage at the moment his father died, and in England his father's dog let out a howl and also died. Another story recounted by Carter and others involved in the excavation involves a canary that Carter had brought at the beginning of the digging season. Egyptian workmen considered the canary a sign of good luck, and they had dubbed the tomb of the bird. A cobra entered Carter's house and ate the canary alive, and Egyptians refer to it as an ill omen, relating the intruding animal to the uraeus, which is the protective cobra on the brow of Tutankhamun's statues. Mm-hmm. If you recall the gilded snake on the forehead of the pharaohs, that's known as the uraeus, the cobra, there to protect the pharaoh. George J. Gould, a visitor of the tomb, died in the following May. His death was attributed to the curse. Audrey Herbert was Carnarvon's half brother. He passed in September. Mace died in 28. Carnarvon's secretary Richard Bethel died in 29, and Weigall had died by 34, the Egyptologist who was the Daily Mail correspondent. So within 12 years, you have what?
Everybody involved with the initial opening of the tomb is dead.
8 deaths. Egyptologists dismissed the claims, but in subsequent decades, sources such as Philip Vandenberg, the author, suggested natural explanations like poisons present in the tomb. But the British Medical Journal in 2002 found no significant difference in mortality between those who had entered the tomb and those who had not. Writers picked up on this trope, however. Yeah, right. Writers had picked up on the trope, used it for their own purposes. The newspaper Al Awram published humorous stories in which Tutankhamun awoke from death to comment on modern politics. Works of fiction depicting mummies confronting Westerners who disturb their tombs in their hubris. Although Western stories also had the same idea, so this was common for the period.
Yeah.
However, post-revolution, these mummies are not objects of horror. They are national ancestors seeking to redress the treatment of Egypt and its heritage. I mean, that's something for today even. Although it's less about Egyptian nationality. There are the museums of in Egypt. Well, actually, it's starting in Britain.
Mm-hmm.
There are museums that are trying to move away from the terminology of calling them mummies and actually referring to the remains as mummified persons to emphasize that they were at one point living people. This is an attempt to sort of address the idea that mummies are dehumanized and they're merely objects. I mean, we did turn them into trophies and
boner pills
and commodities and things to be ingested. So to refer to them as mummified persons and to refer to the personality of the individual who was once living, they're trying to start a precedent of respecting them as remains. I mean, you can think to the Battle of Jutland between the Imperial German Navy and the Royal Navy. Those ships that are on the bottom of the ocean are war graves and not to be disturbed by submersibles. Ships that were sunk in the Pacific Theater in World War II.
Yeah, at this point, isn't it like you're not supposed to like even dive by a lot of that stuff because for the same reason? Yeah,
a lot of them are protected wreckage because they're graves.
Yeah.
Now, there's a very interesting fact about these wreckages, and that the steel contained in the wrecks is actually has a different molecular composition than steel of today because of the nuclear detonations that ended World War II.
Which is needed for a lot of surgical instruments and stuff, medicine.
You're seeing an issue where treasure hunters, some believe they're egged on by certain governments, are actually removing steel from these war graves because of its particular pre-nuclear detonation properties. So even today, we have grave robbers of a different variety. Very interesting to think about. Even today, there's this idea, this attempt to humanize the mummies, lend credence to the fact that these were once people of an esteemed and proud empire, and in some cases ran said empire, and they're not meant to be desecrated, partitioned, consumed, ground up. It certainly is a foolhardy notion. I mean, we laughed about the idea of Victorian English nobles cutting up someone's body that had been preserved and sanctified for them a religious ritual that they believed in, and then treating it like we treated frogs in the 8th grade.
Right. Yeah. It's like we're like, oh, let's open the person pinata and see what jewelry we can find at this point.
I will say that does give me the idea of a chocolatier making a novelty mummy pinata, like chocolate pinata full of candies. That would be far less invasive and far less offensive. And
let's do it right now.
Tasty millionaire idea. Someone pay me. I would eat it. Just like Uncle Julio's, right? With the Yeah, I'd smash open a chocolate sarcophagus. That's as far as I'm going
Yeah.
with the destruction of mummies, only edible ones. So yeah, there were already multiple fatalities before the second digging season. By the time this opened, Carter and Mace had written their first volume of the Tomb of Tutankhamun. At the time, they referred to him as Tutankhamun by the individual hieroglyphs.
Mm-hmm.
The account of the discovery and work that had been done thus far had been published in October as Carter headed back to Egypt to resume his work. The tomb clearance was now being financed by Carnarvon's widow, Almina Herbert, Countess of Carnarvon.
Oh.
Carter was now the only spokesman to the government and to the press. Two
Yeah,
lifestyle.
because there's a point initially where Carnarvon was kind of like the one handling the press and stuff, right? 'Cause
Yes,
he was the bankroller. He wanted to have that on his like little, you know.
yeah. We use the analogy of like the movie director and the movie producer. He's like,
Yeah.
well, I funded this, and astute.
We're gonna slap my name on it, you know.
Astute listeners may remember that he gave Carter one more season to dig, and then he was done. But he's like, oh no, I always believed in him. I knew he could do it.
See, I told you would find it, old boy.
Yeah, yeah. Let's see. They were still excavating finds by 1924.
Mm-hmm.
The Waft Party came to power in the Egyptian elections of January 24. A nationalist government had been headed by Prime Minister Saad Zaghloul,
Mm-hmm.
and they, let's see, Marcos Behana, the new Minister of Public Works, was not inclined to be accommodating towards Britons.
Yeah, I believe in World War II, didn't Egypt end up kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't they end up kind of, backing Germany in the Second World War because of like their treatment by the British Empire? Or maybe I'm wrong.
I know about like El Alamein, and I know that Rommel engaged Montgomery, and I know that the Germans and the Italians, the Deutsche Afrika Korps, had their conflicts. The first and second battle.
Well, they're heavily involved in the North Africa campaign.
Yeah, so there was a lot of fighting in North Africa around this period. I'm not an expert on how Egypt lent their resources in World War II. I know World War I was a different story, as the British still clung to power in the area. That would have to be something I'd have to do research.
So the Italians invaded. No, I think they were like trying to just be by themselves, and then everyone was like, "I'm gonna invade because there's that black gook that's bubbling out of the ground, so therefore I needs it."
Yeah, a major.
So Italy invaded Egypt in 1940. And then until looks like until February 1941, they finally got kicked out. But then Rommel's stuff happened and right after that. So, but that was more in Libya. Oh, yeah. So I guess it seems like the British, even though they like gave them up as a colony, they still kept like troops in Egypt up until like through the war and stuff. So never mind, I spoke incorrectly.
Yeah, but
Back to you.
Well, you bring up a very good point though. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who later became president of the United States, had a quote associated to him: "You will not find it difficult to prove that battles, campaigns, and even wars have been won or lost primarily because of logistics." There are multiple quotes to Napoleon about logistics he learned the hard way, invading Russia. A major factor in the North African campaign of World War II was the scarcity of petrol, the scarcity of what we call gasoline. And
because at that point, the only time that you see that was if you could, we weren't like mining for it yet at that point. It was only basically just the stuff we could find bubbling out of the ground. It wasn't, we weren't like putting up deep ocean refineries and digging deep for it yet at that point.
Well, the other thing is when you're engaged in open war, a major factor for the limitation of petrol for Rommel at the time, you had embargoes, you had assaults on sea shipping.
Mm-hmm.
The Germans, the naval power of Germany was acutely focused mainly after losing the Bismarck and so on. The majority of the strength of the German Kriegsmarine was in the U-boats, and with their anti-shipping campaign to destroy resources, gasoline, fuel, ammunition to the Allies. North Africa, relatively flat compared to the bocage of France or the mud of Russia. Large flat areas, you have tanks traveling for miles and miles and miles with poor gas mileage.
Yeah.
So in order to marshal your troops together, you're using up lots and lots of material.
So I don't know if any of you have ever tried walking in sand. It's pretty difficult. So I can't imagine that it's that much easier for a tank to do.
Yeah. So Egypt not only has great cultural wealth and great archaeological wealth, there's also the considerations of, at the time, this may still be true, the natural resources contained in North Africa. So that was a factor in that campaign. I mean, there's a reason why Napoleon was there. Mm-hmm. And you'll find throughout history that many war zones have been occupied throughout the centuries by those foolhardy enough to assume that they can take it for themselves. Mm-hmm. Egypt is no exception.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then if the documentary Indiana Jones was anything to tell me, there's obviously the Ark of the Covenant that we had to find.
That's true. We have yet to actually find it.
Just to add on a little bit of the occult stuff going on at the.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. So at this time, by the second season of excavation, they still had worries that the new Egyptian government would not be friendly to Westerners or it would be restrictive and so on.
Mm-hmm.
There was an eventual strike, I believe. Let's see. Yeah. Carter and his collaborators were incensed when a viewing of the coffin by Egyptian press had been scheduled for 13th of February of the second digging season, followed by a tour for the excavators' wives and families. Morkos Behana, the new Minister of Public Works, saw this as a slight. He pointed out that the wives of the Egyptian cabinet ministers had not been allowed into the tombs and forbade the families from visiting. And these excavators have been working,
So wait, because Carter was like, hey, you guys, you helped me dig this. Come show your families all the hard work you've been doing. And then the governor was like, bah. You didn't show my cabinet members the stuff yet. Why did these peasants get to view it first?
So the public works minister sent a police force to prevent this from happening. So Carter and his collaborators announced they were halting work in protest of what they called impossible restrictions and discourtecies imposed by the Egyptian government.
I like this Carter guy. He's not your typical douchey, racist British guy at the time. He's trying to preserve these artifacts. He's it sounds like he treats his workers pretty well, that he hires from the local labor force and whatnot.
Yeah, he locked the tomb.
Yeah.
The sarcophagus lid was still suspended above the coffin and locked access to it. Hannah terminated the Carnarvon concession, the previous agreement. And Lacau, had brought workmen to the tomb to saw off the locks and secure the sarcophagus lid. The government held a lavish event at the tomb to celebrate its opening, attended by officials and celebrity guests. There were British officials at the reopening, so the British government wasn't exactly backing Carter in this dispute.
Mm-hmm.
However, he sued the Antiquities Service in the Mixed Courts of Egypt, a colonial institution for resolving disputes involving non-Egyptians.
The question is, did he win?
Did he win? Well, the Mixed Courts ruled in Carter's favor, but Hannah took it to a higher court, which on the 31st of March issued a decision that fully supported Hannah's position. Carter left Egypt.
Off. Got it.
Yeah, Carter left Egypt on the 21st of March, setting out on a lecture tour. His absence eased the tensions around the tomb. As Maxwell retired, who began transferring his responsibilities to a more conciliatory lawyer. They were trying to find a new Egyptologist to complete the tomb clearance, but no one wanted to take on the task. Let's see. By the 19th of November 1924, the political situation in Egypt had changed dramatically. The Sirdar of the Egyptian army was assassinated by nationalists. The British were furious. Zaghloul
Another
resigned.
curse, perhaps? No.
Sure, sure. We'll associate geopolitical strife to the curse of the pharaoh. Ahmed Zawar Pasha, his successor, formed a more pro-British government, with which the parties involved in the tomb clearance were able to reach an agreement. Carter would oversee the clearance. Lady Carnarvon would continue to fund it, but renounced her claim to a share of the burial goods. He resumed work again on 25th January 1925. So this is, what, 2.5 years that they're still working on this? It looks like no one is dying of the curse anymore for some time.
It's interesting because you think of this like this time with like archaeology and paleontology to be sort of like a very like Wild West sort of thing where everyone's just like digging shit up and just like trashing, artifacts and stuff in the hurry to find like valuable stuff or like anything of interest. But like then you find out like this excavation of this tomb, which is like not that large, what took place over the course of like years. So it's like, because you talk about like now you're like, oh, we don't use those techniques anymore because it just destroys things so much. It seems like, I don't know if different archaeological digs at the time were like more, blasé about it, but you find out that like it's for all intents and purposes, like Carter's team was like very like careful with what they were finding, and it was like not like some like free for all where they're like taking everything and just like not paying attention because
Have you seen the King Tut exhibit?
yes,
The fact that both of us have seen it
yeah,
lends credence to the idea that they were meticulous with their care. The
right.
fact that we were able to observe it, 5,398 distinct objects were removed and numbered from the tomb. Carter estimated 0.25% of the objects were damaged beyond repair. So that's quite successful.
Yeah,
It's actually impressive.
well, it's interesting because I might be confusing this with something else. Wasn't there an issue with when they like opened things up with degradation of like what was there, or because I know there was that this is a whole different thing, but there's that the tomb of that Chinese emperor with all the terracotta soldiers. I can't think of his name. I know that they like when they first opened that, like every single one of those terracotta soldiers was like brilliantly like painted and dyed, but then like within like days of opening it, like all of that paint and everything had like degraded beyond like it had all gone away. So now there's other chambers of those soldiers that they haven't opened yet because they don't want like it to get like just instantly destroyed when they open it.
That would be an interesting line of research to do, is to see if there's any embalming or chemical process on the corpus of these ancient Chinese who were encased, and if they had embalming agents, if they were wrapped in anything.
Well, so these are just those terracotta soldiers, but like so they were like brilliantly like they were basically like lifelike, like
Okay, so
all their armor and stuff was
you're
painted
you're
and
just talking
glazed.
you're just
Yeah,
talking
just the soldiers. Yeah.
Okay, because I do know that there was a Chinese. Well, 'cause there are mummies of different mummified persons of different civilizations. I think the Inca. There were many in the Andes. There are bodies found in peat bogs that, due to the chemical nature, are preserved remarkably. There is a. Let me look this up.
Well, there's that. Was it that? There's like that Neanderthal guy in the Italian Alps too, but he just like got like died in permafrost or whatever. But
Yeah, and there's like the Cheddar Man that they found in the UK and that sort of thing. There's a here we go. I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, but Jin Shui, known as Lady Dai or the Marquise of Dai, was a Chinese noblewoman. Her tomb, containing her well-preserved remains and 1,400 artifacts, was discovered in 1968 at Mahuangdi, Changsha, Hunan, China. Her body is being notable as being one of the most preserved mummies ever found.
Hmm.
This is something that I was able to somehow read a book on in the 8th grade. Um, she was in 4 coffins of decreasing sizes that enclosed each
Hmm.
other. I'm trying to look at the chemical composition of her mummified remains. Remarkably well preserved in an unknown fluid inside the coffin, so they didn't even know what it was.
They didn't even check.
Her skin
Jerks.
was her skin was soft and moist. Muscles still allowed for arms and legs to flex at the joints. Her organs and blood vessels were still intact. She had type A blood found in her veins. She had hair on her head, a wig pinned with a hair clasp. She had skin on her face. Her eyelashes, nose, and hair still existed. She still had the tympanic membrane of her left ear,
Hmm.
finger, and toe prints. Preservation allowed doctors at the Hunan Provincial Medical Institute to perform an autopsy on the 14th of December 1972. So I remember reading about this in high school, the 8th grade. They don't know what the fluid was that preserved her so remarkably.
Hmm.
It was an unknown acidic liquid that helped to preserve the body by preventing bacteria from growing. They think that the fluid is actually water from the body rather than liquid poured into the coffin. So unknown chemical origin for how
Yeah.
her body was preserved so well. But yeah, there were different methods to do so.
Well, and then just like while we're on the subject of other like mummies, the what's interesting for like that for that Chinese mummified person versus like the Egyptians, you have the Andes mummified persons of where as instead of like being like a point of like veneration in the case of like Egypt, and it sounds like this Chinese woman, you have the ones of the Inca who basically worshipped their mountains, and they'd find we're still finding like ritual sacrifices that were done. These mummies that were basically of girls or whatever that were basically just sent up in the mountains to like freeze to death, and because like those
Super
areas
young
never
too,
like
right?
refreeze
Yeah.
or like thaw out, like they're completely preserved. I'm looking at one that's like you almost like you almost wouldn't be able to tell that this person's like frozen or like dead. Like they look like they're sleeping, because they're basically just like frozen instead of desiccated. But
Yeah, there are many methods to secure the preservation of
yeah.
remains.
And then in the case like you said, you have
The environment alone
the
can
cheddar
contribute.
man who's like just some drunk guy that fell into a peat bog or uh,
They found they found bodies that were also murdered and tossed into
yeah.
the pond. And
There's like the one guy that was like they're still not sure like what happened, but like because he's got like a hole in the back of his head from his like head getting caved in, and they just like found him in the bottom of a bog one day, and they thought it was like a recent murder, and then they found out that the guy was like from like the 500s or something.
I guarantee you it wasn't from him swinging a hammer too far behind his head.
Mm-hmm,
Most likely it was someone else who had a disagreement with him. Um,
Right.
but yeah, so you were mentioning if anything had happened to the condition of Tutankhamun's body itself. In late 1925, they started excavating Tutankhamun's remains from the sarcophagus. His mummy lay within a nested series of 3 coffins. The innermost was 243 pounds of solid gold. Oh my.
How much?
243 pounds, 110.4 kilos.
It's a lot of
Solid.
gold.
That's a lot of gold. On his body and within his mummy wrappings, the king bore a plethora of jewelry, a gold burial mask. The inner coffin and the mummy had both been covered in unguents. They had solidified into a hard resin, gluing the mummy into a single mass stuck to the bottom of the inner coffin.
Sorry, one more time. How many pounds of gold?
243 pounds of gold. Are you trying to calculate how much that would be worth today?
Yeah.
I knew it. And that's just raw material. That's not counting the immeasurable wealth of its historical significance and artistry. And the raw material gold worth would be how much, Ben?
$5,293,349.
So that's $5 million today just from the raw material of gold.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
That's nuts.
The thing
Wow.
with Tutankhamun's tomb, though, if you were to national treasure it and build a team with Nicolas Cage to steal this thing, good luck selling it. There's
Yeah.
I mean, there are very few places in the world where someone would be able to get the money to pay you, but then also do it surreptitiously and without detection. It's just too valuable to too many civilizations.
I mean, you'd have to get the gold real quick, and you'd have to melt it down real fast.
I feel like
But there's also probably carbon dating involved that you could, like, I don't know.
you'd be crazy to melt it down because the immeasurable historical value and the artistry involved.
Right, because it's like how much is it worth as just like the artifact versus how much is it just like worth in like gold value? Like,
I would argue it would be difficult to find a price. I mean, you'd have to find.
well, it's like someone trying to ransom the most Mona Lisa or whatever. You know?
Right. You'd have to get like oil levels of stupid money.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
like, oh yeah, how mmany billions do you need? That's before you could even think about.
Yeah.
It's fascinating that it's millions of dollars alone in just
gold.
Yeah. Let's see. The unguents had undergone a chemical reaction that had carbonized the linen mummy wrappings. Some of the tissues of the mummy itself had been rendered extremely fragile. The excavators first tried to melt the resin by taking the coffins out of the tomb to be heated by the sun, but this failed. His remains were still in place within the coffins when they began to examine them on the 11th of November 25. Over the course of 8 days, they dismembered the mummy and individually chiseled the pieces out of the massive resin, removing the burial goods as they did so, and examined the pieces individually. It appears as though that was the only way to remove them. Yeah. Although it looks like they cleared away the remaining resin with solvents. You know what they did? They were probably afraid of the concept of dissolving the corpus itself with those solvents. It appears, though, that treating the remains with these preservatives, it did not desiccate or fall apart to the air.
Mm-hmm.
I could see that happening in cases of mummies that are sealed, hermetically sealed, but then not treated.
Yeah.
Because like you think of mummies at high elevation, they're preserved mainly because of the temperature and chemical properties.
They mostly hit those. They have to retain them in state. You know, like basically keep them on ice or whatever. Like
keep them on ice. Yeah. Well, I mean, for lack of a better term, right? It looks like. Let's see. Carter was dead by 1939.
I think we debunked the curse.
That's too much of a stretch for the curse.
Did he even die like super young?
I don't know. No, I don't.
Maybe that's why Carter lived, is because he's the only one of these British guys that was treating the Egyptian workers right.
He was 64, so he was Paul McCartney old.
I mean, but for the time,
he had a good run. Yeah. He had Hodgkin's disease, so he didn't die of like snakes in the eyes or anything.
Yeah, he didn't get like scarabed to death. He was like
right. I would go as far as to say that Carter, due to his respect of Egypt and of the sciences, ducked the curse.
Yeah, because sounds like he was the only good guy in all this. You know, Carnivan was like, I just got to figure out how to make money off it. Carter was like, I just want to study the stuff, and then Carnivan was like, I want to make money off it. I want to make my investment back, and so he got hit by the curse.
The Mask of Tutankhamun is currently housed in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, and boy, does that thing look fantastic. I'm trying to think of
toss that up there.
Sure, I'm trying to see if I had seen a replica or here.
I don't think they cart the mummy around. It's replica in the
this is just the what do
Oh
you call
yeah,
the headpiece?
that's
To look
like
at that.
the
It's
like
fascinating.
you think mummies, you see that image in your head.
This is the first image of any mummified remains or memorabilia associated with mummified remains I'd ever seen in my life
I
was
love how
this.
your sorry, this is I love how your tabs are like all about the mummy stuff and then mop.
Oh yeah, yeah. If I don't leave that up, then I'm like, what's my D&D password?
Yeah.
But I want to see how pimped Tutankhamun's ride was.
Yeah.
his his wheels to the afterlife. I want to see how pimped out it was. I'm just
Yeah,
trying to
can you
see.
see if he just basically look up like Tut's tomb or something.
Here we go. Here we go. So the mask alone is fashioned from 2 layers of high carat gold, varying from 1.3 to 3 millimeters in thickness, weighs 22.6 pounds. The mask is primarily made of copper alloy 23 karat gold to facilitate being able to shape it in cold
Hmm.
temperatures.
Yep.
Gold is, a soft metal, so that makes sense. The surface of the mask is covered in a very thin layer of 2 different alloys of gold, an 18.4 karat shade for the face and neck, 22.5 karat gold for the rest of the mask. He wears a Nemes headcloth, I hope that's how you pronounce it, topped by the royal insignia of a cobra, the wajet, and a vulture, the nekhbet, symbolizing Tutankhamun's rule of both Lower and Upper Egypt. The ears are pierced to hold earrings reserved for queens and children in almost all surviving ancient Egyptian works of art. The mask is inlaid with colored glass and gemstones: lapis lazuli, quartz, obsidian, carnelian, amazonite, turquoise, and faience. So precious minerals, gold,
Semi-precious stones.
stones. It's just, he was riding in style.
It's pretty. And this
Yeah.
is just like he's mostly considered to be like I think we talked he's mostly was like not that big of deal as far as like in terms of like the dynasty of Egypt is concerned, right? Because
Yeah.
he died
So
so young and stuff.
we remember Tutankhamun for the intactness of his tomb, the
Yeah.
amount of artifacts recovered,
It basically like his hadn't
preservation
gotten
of the
raided
body.
by grave robbers thousands of years ago. He got basically like they never found it until, the 1900s.
Yeah, it's kind of like Sue in the
Hmm.
Field Museum. The It may still be the case. I believe it's
Hmm.
still the most well preserved T-Rex skeleton. You think of Sue because of the intactness
Hmm.
of the find.
Yeah.
So much of Tutankhamun's accoutrement of the end of his life had been successfully retained.
Yeah.
Sounds like Killian disagrees.
Well, with that, I feel like we're running out of runway here, so I think we'll probably call it at this point. Uh, but I'd like to thank Brendan for giving us a little romp through sort of Egyptomania and King Tut's tomb, as well as some other random asides that mostly perpetrated by yours truly. And we'll see you guys again on Wednesday for some more Dungeons and Dragons action. Unless you had anything else to add tonight, Brendan.
Thanks for sticking around and watching this impassioned amateur foray into ancient history.
Yeah. Just riff for a little bit. I'm gonna find out who we're gonna go watch tonight.
I'll have some embalmed remains of my own, pickled cucumbers.
I thought you went and put those in the fridge. You changed your mind?
Okay.
They're too good. I'm gonna eat this whole thing. Here's some
See.
cultural exchange for you. It's very common in the American South for our international listeners
Ooh, Curse
to
of Strahd.
pickle cucumbers in Kool-Aid.
Oh, really?
I've yet to comment on how good or bad it tastes, but they take the color of the powder, so you get purple pickles and red pickles, and orange pickles and what have you.
Looks like we got somebody playing Curse of Strahd. Let's go watch them.
Hope this isn't like my last.
Oh, isn't a pickled cucumber just a pickle?
Well, no, because like in the UK they call them gherkins because we call them pickles, but we have British listeners because Joel will not stop talking about it, and they call them gherkins because I watched the Great British Baking Show, and I've had Syrian pickles, and they pickle carrots and they pickle onions, pickled radishes.
Pickling is like a process, but also like when you say pickle, you're talking about a cucumber.
Well, here in America, because we pickle very.
Oh, you're getting called out. That's a specific type of pickle, Brendan.
What, a gherkin is this type of pickle?
Yeah, you're getting called out.
So wait. So do they have gherkins and pickled cucumbers? Are they two different things?
I think that's what you're getting.
What is there a gastronomical difference between the two?
I don't think the composition is a difference. I think it's just more like parlance, but I think she's got you there.
The verbiage. Okay.
Yeah, Creep, thanks for chiming in. We were just gonna head out on a raid, but just as another announcement, we said it at the top of the show, we're doing reminder, Darling Creep Show is going to be joining us on Friday for some Dungeons and Dragons action. So hope you enjoyed our little talk about some mummies in Egypt and all that stuff. But
time for us to go on a journey of pickling archaeology.
She's also obsessed with all things pickled. So so we'll
big fans of pickles there too.
Yeah. So you just got told, Brendan. So, but we're gonna go check out this raid on Board Game House. They're playing some. They're doing some. Shit, I just looked at it. They're doing some Curse of Strahd. So yeah, good night, Creep. We'll see you soon. And away we go. All right.
I gotta look this up.